Fast forward, you come our channel, so I'll say AGH Politics Avenue. Podcast or secretary because speaking headlines. And I only jam right now, it be exum. We need him young Braximo, Mr. Oxe, Yanko, a ye in Simu. Only a boy, a writing Sima, a hayani breaky, a demand will say a year former Buffer Stock CEO. One in a year, Attorney General at me at drop charges, Nina, Quedo the boning in ano. Where ye Eddie Efriniswa, and then Nehu, a Sanya, and Yasem Kotuano. Right after that, now. EOCO asan akwakoche papano awunia asan koya aregusem edi ama eye papano ene ne yere na mesha okse yemonwura eye insimnim na yehwe ne yeko ene de ba.
The details for us from the Sakumo Ramza side there, but we'll move away from that because the Economic and Organized Crime Office, EOCO, has rearrested the former Chief Executive Officer of the National Food Buffer Stock, Abdul-Wahab, and his wife, Faiza Wuni, second accused shortly after the Attorney General withdrew all charges against them in the ongoing criminal prosecution. This happened shortly after the prosecution formally discontinued the case, bringing proceedings at the High Court to an end. Lawyers for the accused persons have strongly criticized the move. Counsel for the second accused, Augustino Bo, described the Attorney General's decision as an abuse of discretionary power, arguing that the case had been pursued almost to its conclusion. He warned that any attempts by the Attorney General to refile or continue the matter in another court will further amount to an abuse of the process. He maintained that if the state intended to pursue different charges, it should have amended them instead of withdrawing the case entirely, stressing that the Attorney General's discretion must be exercised in line with the rights of the accused persons in mind. Similarly, counsel for the first accused, Godfrey Adame, questioned the approach taken by the prosecution. However, he indicated that the defense will not oppose the withdrawal, describing it as a form of reprieve, although he expressed concern about the rearrest.
The proper way, as I indicated, is to undertake painstaking investigations as we did, and not to hurriedly lump the accused persons before the court, put them before the court and all that. I mean, when we took our time to conduct investigations and all that, their only answer was to delay. The only answer of the NDC then was to delay the prosecution. And of course, the court also aided it with all manner of rulings and all which stratified the prosecutions. And today they seek to rush the same court into convicting the accused persons who happen to be MPP people. And of course, all the NDC persons who have been prosecuted, they have discharged them soon or prosecuted. So you see in this country that the manifestation of gross abuse of procedural discretion. I mean, when the accused persons are before the court, cases are concluded, they have been adjudged to have a case to answer by court of competent jurisdiction. The Attorney General comes to discontinue all and then puts before the court a new set of accused persons who are all MPP appointees. And without any evidence at all, he undertakes the prosecution only for him to discontinue and then right after start rearresting them and to undertake investigations of what. We look to see, we know that no matter the number of times he is put before the court, whether 2 times, 3 times, or 10 times, he will be cleared 10 times.
That's Godfrey Addame's counsel for the first accused in this case. But what are the charges which the Attorney General's office has withdrawn and is seeking or has rearrested, or EOCO has rearrested the said individuals and they are headed to court again? I want to take you to the dashboard quickly this afternoon so we can abreast ourselves with what the charges were. Now we can say that what the charges were because they are no longer before the court at this particular point in time. And whether or not it can give an indication as to what the new charges as well possibly could be. And so of the many things they were charged for: stealing, fraudulently causing financial loss to the state, intentionally causing financial loss to the state as well as money laundering, dishonestly receiving, and intentional dissipation of funds and using public office for profits. These were the charges upon which a number of counts came up and they were put before the court as well. But we know that the Office of the Attorney General has been providing a bit more in terms of details as to the decision to withdraw the charges and their rearrest and the subsequent refiling or filing again or fresh charges against them. Here's what Deputy Attorney General Dr. Justice Sremsai has been saying via Facebook. He says that following the discovery of fresh evidence, and so the state says fresh evidence has been found in the ongoing case against Abdul-Hanan and his wife, and so they subsequently decided to withdraw from the prosecution of all the accused persons in the case of the Republic versus Hanan Abdul-Wahab, Aludiba, and 4 others, his wife inclusive. This is to afford each of the accused persons a fair and more speedy trial in accordance with the Constitution. The Deputy Attorney General proceeds to say that later this afternoon, the last but one prosecution witness in the case of another subject matter of the Republic versus Kwabena Dubois, and that's a Signals Bureau case, will continue her testimony. A former bank relationship manager and later employee of the accused persons, this prosecution witness testifies to how the accused persons got and spent the monies which we believe they stole from the state. And so 2 updates which the Deputy AG provides. The first is the justification and the reasoning as to why they decided to withdraw the matter from the court. But it will take us on to our very first break for you this afternoon, where when we return, well, in different parts of the country,
with rising costs, particularly from open market operations, driving the deterioration. Remember, conversation around sterilization as a way of curbing the impact of open market operations, and the fact that, you know, some members of the Finance Committee thought that there was over-sterilization of the market. He's also talked about a few other matters I want us to see. The true financial impact is more severe when comprehensive losses are considered, with total losses for 2025 surging to nearly 35 billion and about 44 billion when adjusted. We've heard this too a number of times. Remember, the central bank itself posted a loss of 15 plus billion cedis. The Minority Caucus has consistently said it is much more than that. It's about 44 billion cedis when adjusted. There is also the open market operation costs, which have become extremely high, consuming most of the bank's income, with monetary policy now carrying heavy quasi-fiscal costs. Now, we've been through that already. I will not belabor that point. Finally, he talks about inflation control, which is increasingly coming at the expense of domestic production and jobs, while the bank's reported policy solvency relies heavily on one-off gold gains. Without gold sales, the former finance minister continues, the bank's financial position appears significantly weaker, with gold transactions introducing volatility and raising transparency concerns, even as the bank records both gains and losses from such dealings. Remember that the central bank has said that, look, when the currency got better, we didn't make the projected returns we thought we could make from gold sales because our currency is what? Better. But the finance minister obviously says, look, this one-off gold sales and transaction volatility and raising transparency concerns around our gold transactions, essentially. And then there's also the re-evaluation reserves have been sharply eroded by exchange rate losses, leaving the bank's balance sheet highly exposed to currency and valuation swings, while the sale of gold reserves has played a major role in supporting income. The IMF, he concludes, should require a clear and transparent recapitalization plan from the central bank, outlining the total cost, financing structure, timelines, and path to restoring positive equity. The government must reflect the bank's negative equity in its fiscal framework, treating it as a real obligation in debt and fiscal framework. We'll have a chat on the back of this shortly. In the meantime, we know that the majority in Parliament has called the bluff of the minority, describing their runs over the central bank's 2025 losses as lacking any grip because the central bank made huge losses under the past administration, justifying the losses as the outcome of deliberate policy interventions which have eased inflation, bolstered investor confidence, and stabilized the cedi. Chairman of the Economy and Development Committee says the central bank lost over 80 billion cedis between 2022 and 2024. Now, he also says it is untrue that the BOG is policy insolvent, adding that no central bank works to maximize profits.
And reassurance regarding the 2025 financial results of the Bank of Ghana, BOG, particularly in light of ongoing public discussions about the bank's reported losses and equity position. As the majority side of the Committee on Economy and Development and the entire majority, we consider it necessary in the interest of transparency and informed public discourse to place these results within their proper context, proper economic and policy context. Ladies and gentlemen, at face value, the bank reported a net loss of 15.6 billion Ghana cedis in 2025 fiscal year, and other comprehensive income charge of 19.32 billion, a negative equity position of 96.3 billion. While these figures are significant, necessary, they must not be interpreted through a narrow lens of commercial banking. I repeat, while these figures are significant, they must not be interpreted through the narrow lens of commercial banking. Central banking is fundamentally a public policy function, and its financial outcomes often reflect the cost of stabilizing the economy. Stabilizing the economy. To be fully appreciate the 2025 results, one must consider the recent historical context between 2022 to 2024. The Bank of Ghana recorded cumulative losses of approximately 80.85 billion Ghana cedis. That is where I want the press to lay more emphasis on. To fully appreciate the 2025 results, one must consider the recent historical context. Between 2022-2024, the Bank of Ghana recorded cumulative losses of approximately 80.85 billion Ghana cedis in the era of the MPP. For instance, in 2022, the Bank of Ghana incurred a loss of 60.81 billion Ghana cedis, 10.55 billion in 2023, and in 2024, 9.49 billion Ghana cedis. This period coincided with one of the most severe macroeconomic crises in Ghana. Inflation, listen to me now, inflation surged at a peak of 54.13% in 2022, before declining to 23.84% by the end of 2024. The Ghana cedi experienced significant depreciation, reaching approximately 17 cedis to a dollar by December 2024, representing a depreciation of about 19.7%. Gross national reserves stood at about $9.3 billion in 2024, covering 4 months of import cover of goods and services. At the same time, the bank's equity position weakened, recorded negative 64.34 billion Ghana cedis in 2023, improved slightly to a negative 61 billion in 2024. Given this consideration, my friends, the 2025 financial outcome must be understood as the continuation of a deliberate and necessary policy intervention. I want to lay more emphasis here. Given this consideration, the 2025 financial outcomes must be understood as the continuation of a deliberate and necessary policy intervention. In 2025, the bank's balance sheet reflected a debt position of 96 billion, right? However, macroeconomic indicators show a strong and decisive turnaround. Inflation declined sharply to 5.2%. But
we'll stay on this subject. We'll speak to Executive Director at the Institute of Economic and Research for Public Policy, Professor Isaac Boadi. Prof, good afternoon to you and thank you so much for your time. It would appear that the majority-minority, by that the NPP and NDC, are trading accusations over who had the biggest loss while running the central bank. For such an important subject that could impact every life in this country, how does that football of accusation come to you?
Good afternoon to you and to your viewers, your listeners as well, and thanks for having me. Soundbite of what you played. It has to do with the losses at the central bank in Ked. Is that right?
Well, Prof, I'll take the question again. I'm saying that it would appear that the government of the past and the government of today are trading accusations over who has caused more loss at the central bank, perhaps at the detriment of dealing with the proper economic issues of this country. For you, where you sit as a policy analyst, a policy researcher, how does that come to you in times like this? Well, it would appear that we have lost Professor Isaac Boadi. Prof, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
Right. If you had my question, you go ahead with your response then.
Okay. I had a signboard press conference organized by the minority. Before the press conference, we've had the giving the press conference. This is, I'm sure, quite unfortunate. It's coming as a result of the losses of the BOG. In discussing financial statements, take our political. If we keep having our political lenses or we brush issues under carpet, the minority organized a press conference for the statement. Is right.
The majority held a news conference before the announcement was officially made by the central bank.
Okay, that was the first one that was organized by the majority.
Absolutely.
She also organized one, and we have also had one from minority again.
Indeed.
Let's put all the press conferences aside, and now even focus on the consideration. An entity makes loss and incurs negative equity. Yes, it should be understood this is not the first time a bank has made a loss. It's not the first time. And I've said on other platforms that it is so wrong for a central bank to make loss. But the point is that we need to interrogate the circumstances under which they incur, and that is fundamental. And I'll give you several examples of situations where such a loss should be accepted. In terms of what we have and as a country had in that situation for some time, they've given an account of how much we lost as a country from 60 billion in 2022, dropped down to 30 to 9, and now it's gone up again. Which entity in the world today or an institution will celebrate a loss? I've not heard this before. Nation will be happy and will make comparisons and say that you lost this. We have done it, it's happened again. So we should clap. I don't think an organization will encourage it.
The explanation, Prof, we've heard from the central bank is that...
Come again?
I'm saying that the explanation we've heard from the central bank for the losses is they say that recovery cost that much. What do you think about that?
recovery. What's that much?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that a central bank used an instrument to mop up excess, and that the cost associated to that stood at 16 billion.
We ain't some more to Mukoso channel, so Mamma was so jemre. That's an so bad in the Adumi Edumania. Bishia, na Yasanya Sumo Consumo.